for value-added agriculture and agritourism. I'm Martin Prue, value-added agricultural specialist with MBA. Before we get started, I just wanted to disclose that this meeting is being recorded in accordance with the Maryland Open Meetings Act to ensure transparency and public access to the proceedings. All attendees are considered to have consented to being recorded by participating in this meeting. I think we can jump into some roll call, if that's okay. We'll just go around the room for those with us today, and then we will jump to those joining us online. Again, Martin Prue, value-added agricultural specialist with Maryland Department of Agriculture. I'll go to my left, Dr. Mitchell, if you don't mind.
Dr. Clifford Mitchell, Maryland Department of Health, Director of the Environmental Health Bureau. Harry Coker, Secretary of Commerce, State of Maryland.
Danny Howe, wastewater permits program for MDE.
Suzanne Dorsey, Deputy Secretary, MD.
Okay. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Patricia Balls, Chief of the Office of Food Protection.
Samantha Bolton, Chief of the Center of Facility Process Review, MDH.
Oh, me next? Okay. Jessica Richards. I am here as an at-large member, but I also represent Tri-County Council for Southern Maryland as Betty Jaffrey.
And good afternoon, Rachel Jones, Director of Government Relations here at MDA.
Harrison Palmer, Executive Secretary of Boards and Commissions for MDA, and we'll take it online in no particular order, but from left to right. Jenny Dempsey.
Hello, this is Jenny Dempsey. I'm the Director of the Office of Planning and Zoning for Anne Arundel County.
Thank you, Jenny. Craig.
Craig Humboldt, Director of Environmental Health, Garrett County.
Thank you. Megan.
Good afternoon. I'm Megan Todd, Senior Research Associate and Managing Director at the Agile Education Initiative at the University of Maryland, Baltimore School of Law.
Thank you. Joe.
Hello there. Afternoon. My name is Joe Malone, and I'm the Agricultural Programs Manager with the Maryland Department of Commerce.
Dr. Colleen Rahman.
Afternoon, y'all. I'm Nilesh Kalyanaraman, the Deputy Secretary of Public Health at the Maryland Department of Health. And just noting that I'm going to have to drop at 2:30, but I think MDH is here in force, so we'll be good.
Great. Allison.
Hi, everyone. Allison Rowe with Mark Bidco, filling in for Steve McHenry.
Thank you. Christopher.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a health policy analyst. I work with Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Kalyanaraman at the Department of Health.
Thank you. Supa.
Hi, good afternoon. Shubha Chandler. I'm the Deputy Director of our Environmental Health Bureau with Cliff and Pat and Sam. So, Maryland Department of Health. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Stephanie Jones, representing MACO, also a long-range principal planner with Queen Anne's County.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. A couple of quick administrative updates. If you look at the back of your agenda, there are appointed members to this commission who will be ones that are eligible to make motions, approve and second minutes, and then again carry on any of that business. The advisory agencies are listed below, and all the partners as well are non-voting but ex officio advisory throughout the meeting. So just as a piece of clarity as we're looking for motions for minutes, etc. That's the way this all shakes out. But Martin, I'll give it back to you.
So Stephanie, Jenny, Megan, and Jessica, we're relying on you for any motions and approvals. And with that, we will jump right into the approval of December 2024 minutes. It's wild to think it's been 4 months since the subcommittee has met. There's been a lot of great conversations. If everyone has had the chance to review the minutes, I would take a motion to approve the December 2024 minutes for the Value Added and Agritourism Subcommittee.
Jenny Dempsey, so moved.
Thank you, Jenny, with the motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We need that from a voting member, Dr. Colleen Rahman. Jesse, you want to? Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry, could you say that again?
We're looking for a second, Megan, on December 2024 minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you so much. Any discussion? If there's no discussion, I will ask for all in favor.
Aye.
So now I need to find the agenda. A lot of development since last subcommittee meeting, as well as the full GICA commission meeting. I think today is just a lot of great information and updates about all kinds of things that are going on as it relates to the regulatory framework specific to value-added agricultural businesses in Maryland. If you had joined us in December or heard my many presentations since then at various conferences or seminars, we being MDA, had proposed a project that is very similar to something published in 2022 by the Maryland Department of Planning. In 2022, MDP published a guidance document for state and local decision makers and regulatory agencies as it related to forestry. It was a document that was published to kind of create a statewide foundation and unified understanding of the industry and the many faces of it. This value-added agricultural specialist role is only 2 years young. And over that time, we realized that there's still a lot of information that needs to be solidified as it relates to regulating and supporting these entities and industries across the state. So MDA had proposed a statewide guidance and analysis document, which has started in January. We were very fortunate to get a University of Maryland policy fellow who is on his last week with us right now. So crazy how time's flying, but he's been fantastic. That was Aiden Boleen. Aiden and I had taken road trips across the state, visiting various counties and local jurisdictions, meeting with economic development specialists, agricultural development specialists, regulators at the local level, whether that be environmental health specialists, permitting officials, planning directors, etc., to have these roundtable conversations about what are the challenges from the regulatory perspective. Very frequently, MDA is engaging with our partner agencies when something comes up specific to a business or a challenge. And we wanted to get ahead of that. We wanted to start asking these local regulators and our state partners, what are the issues that have arisen from the regulatory perspective, and how can the state help? How can we do better in communicating and clarifying information to the industry? So it's been a real eye-opening experience. And I just want to run through a brief project update of where we've been and where we're going and what you can expect from us in future updates. Again, no action items here, but you'll see when we hope to publish this and what type of information you can expect from us. So Harrison's sharing the slides and we'll run through those. Those will be made available as meeting materials as well. So again, just want to kind of give you a brief summary of the why and then what we've been referencing, what information we've already been sifting through, and then some of just the new findings and themes. And frankly, if you've been engaging in these conversations through GICA or just collaborating with us as agency partners, you're probably familiar with a lot of this, but it's really important for us to start kind of consolidating so we know where to act and how to act. So next slide, please, Harrison. So again, I already referenced the Maryland Department of Planning forestry document. Obviously, it lays out best practices and some challenges as it relates to regulating the industry. Of course, we aren't talking about pizza ovens in these forests, and we aren't talking about parking lots in these forests. So we know that there's certainly added regulations and considerations beyond the concept of forestry when we talk about value-added agriculture and agritourism. I think we can all agree that there's a tangled regulatory web as it relates from laws trickling down or trickling up from the federal, state to local levels. Obviously, when we talk about uses and definitions, whether that be land use or concept or practice, environmental health, and then of course, permitting and planning. Next slide, please, Harrison. So the intent obviously is to untangle this web, to introduce and establish consistent and recognizable concepts for what value-added agriculture is, and more importantly, where it's going. And acknowledging agritourism as one of the unique pieces of value-added agriculture that has a lot more layers to it than your typical just processed good. This is going to work we're learning this might be one of the most well-organized documents of confusion we've ever put out, but we think maybe that's the point. We want to familiarize local state officials and decision makers on the varying levels of laws and regulations that govern value-added agriculture, while showing some benchmarks, case studies, and best practices either across the state or in other states. Next slide, please. So what you can expect from us. So again, Aiden started with us at the end of January. I promised him a lot of farm visits and county tours. Of course, Annapolis swallowed us whole for about a month and a half. So by the end of February, early March, we began county to county visits. We would reach out to the economic development or agricultural development offices to ask them to assemble the audience that they felt fit the scope of this project. So far, we have officially crossed the halfway point. We've met 12 of 24 counties, which is pretty impressive in just a few months. We've asked them for case studies. We've asked them for studies, whether it be local, specific to land use, or agriculture, rural enterprises, and concept. There are a lot of benchmarks out there that we'll just kind of run through briefly. But this is the industry and stakeholder engagement stage, and will continue to be that stage for the time being. We proposed a very ambitious deadline, knowing that we have to be respective of the legislative cycle, as well as all the other relevant industry organizations or agencies that might have to make decisions as it relates to potential action. So we proposed a September 2025 publication date. I've said that way too many times in the same room as Secretary Addix, so we will meet that deadline, and we're working towards it as we speak.
Hey, Mark, do you want questions now or later?
Go ahead, Cliff. What you got?
One question is, when you say you've met 12 of 24 counties, does that include local health in those counties?
So we'll talk about that. But of the 12, I believe 9 of them have included environmental health at the table. These are all first and initial conversations that will certainly have follow-ups. But yes, so what we've done, understanding that each county is unique in how it operates, how it engages with businesses, how it guides businesses. We've been asking the business development leg, whether that be an Office of Agriculture or an Economic Development Office, to invite the relevant entities and regulators to the table. We have had rooms with as few as 6 people and as many as 22 people, depending on that county. So environmental health specialists have been involved, health officers have been involved, even some senators have been invited to the table. So unique conversations, no matter where we've gone. Next slide, please. So just some examples. You'll see that there's a lot of state government references. Obviously, the relevant law as it exists today, just for benchmarks, but there's many counties and jurisdictions across the state that have already taken on their own reports or studies that are either soon to be published or recently been published. That includes Queen Anne's County. The Baltimore County isn't spelled out on there, but Baltimore County has just published a ag zoning study. Frederick County had released an agritourism report and a strategic plan for agriculture. Of course, you may be familiar with the University of Maryland Eastern Shore Extension's tourism report, and Ag Law Education Initiative through University of Maryland published a wonderful zoning matrix that you might be familiar with that showcases all of the definitions for agriculture and agricultural related uses as it relates to local zoning across all jurisdictions, and consolidates that into one spreadsheet, which is a great form of reference. And then again, as far as other states, I mean, there are a lot of great examples. There are, of course, some agricultural departments that do more in other states as far as their reach and their involvement. And so we have to be conscious of that. But there are some state profiles and feasibility studies for this interesting concept that is value-added agriculture and agritourism. So those are just, an example of some of the organizations and states we have reached out to and gotten some materials from as we sort of digest and see what's working, what's not working. So those are all the counties we've visited so far. We have 4 more scheduled, which will take us up to 16. And then we will continue to work through the summer to make sure that we connect. Of course, the summertime keeps us busy with other tours, whether it be local regulatory, local legislative tours, Secretary Addix goes out and about and visits numerous farms as well as the Ag Commission. So we will be engaging with these jurisdictions and making sure that we have these regulatory conversations with all 24 to include Baltimore City. And we also understand that there are plenty of municipalities with farm and agricultural based businesses within their limits. So we will reach out to MML and MACO as part of the conversation as well. So if you've heard me talk about this, just value added as a concept, you've seen these regulatory themes. You may notice there was a fourth one added because our focus has been food, food, food. We needed to acknowledge that, of course, there are more things that happen on the farm as it relates to land use, environmental health, and stewardship than just food production. So the themes that we have broken out for the sake of how they are regulated and the levels of regulation that touch them, of course, is value-added processing, taking a raw product, turning it into something finished, that is milk into cheese, that is grapes into wine, that is strawberries into jams and jellies. The agritourism and food service, which has a lot more local implications as it relates to land use and parking, and food service as it relates to food service facilities and engaging with the public. Retail sales, often one I believe, just anecdotally interacting with the industry, is often one that is a consideration that isn't always thought of when it goes from selling raw produce to adding a fridge and wanting to offer local yogurt and cheese. So a theme that we definitely wanted to consider as it has environmental health implications and land use implications. Of course, that word retail and how it interacts with various zones depending on local zoning and permitting. And then, of course, other, we'll call indirect operations, right? The composting, the on-site functions, some of these accessory operations to the farm, whether it includes equipment or storing certain products. So those are the four themes we like to kind of talk into existence when we discuss value added, and to keep in mind to make sure we are, well encompassed when we explore this concept and talk about it. So the overarching challenges, again, I'm not sure there's going to be too much new information here, but starting to consolidate and be consistent with what we're seeing. And that's at the industry, that is value-added agriculture, and farms as a whole are evolving faster than the speed of government. That's government at all levels. Licenses unintentionally appear to be getting outdated, as well as certain regulatory language as it relates to value-added agriculture and what farms are expecting to do to connect with their clientele and members of the public. There's layered and conflicting frameworks. When a law gets passed at the state level, it could contradict something at the local level. We've run into issues where policy has contradicted international building code, and some of these regulators and even businesses don't know where to look for what is the guiding language. So we understand that, and we've acknowledged that through this process. A lack of scalability. Dr. Mitchell might know that's probably my favorite word at this point. These are small businesses. These are small businesses that deserve resources to scale their way up, whether it's establishing a new farm or taking on the family legacy. There's not a lot in regulation and code that recognizes the limited resources some of these small enterprises have when they're trying to make some of these business decisions, particularly when it comes to the infrastructural investments as it relates to bringing people onto the farm, and the lack of clarity and consistency. But that naturally comes with the layers of regulation and the various levels of entities that regulate these industries. So new findings. So over these past 12 county visits, as well as conferences and seminars, there are some themes coming up or trends coming up that we wanted to share. And I think in the larger GICA meeting most recently, definitions were discussed, so I won't dwell on that too much. But farm is not defined in any state agricultural article. It's defined in COMAR regulations as it relates to our nutrient management plan mandate, but there is no land use article for reference. So when we talk about what is a farm, just generally, sometimes local regulators ask it, sometimes farms ask it. There really is no North Star definition of what we're referencing and what we're building off of when we're making these regulatory decisions or guiding these businesses. there's conflict and overlap. I talked about some of the contradictions, but between regulations and what is viewed as, I'll air quote it, commercial, under the state's definition of agritourism, there are some uses that I think we can all agree are pretty straightforward farm operations, right? You can't have a pumpkin patch anywhere but a farm if the pumpkins are growing out of the ground. The U-Pick, the farm store selling the fresh local products. But then you ramp up to some of these other concepts like camping. Camping comes up a lot. There's a lot of regulatory codes that regulate campgrounds differently than you would something happening on a farm. And so when we take these concepts that are defined elsewhere, I was going to say silos, but that's just not how I was trying to look at my puns today. We overcomplicate it and we confuse the local regulators as well. That's becoming clear. And like I said, we acknowledge that there's a need to account for the municipalities, which is an extra layer of local governance. The lacking seasonal definition and licensing, many farms operate seasonally, and that's not necessarily the on-farm breweries and the on-farm wineries, but those trying to bring the public on for 6-7 months out of the season, as long as strawberries and pumpkins are growing healthily. And then we've been looking at these other state definitions, and I can't say we've honed in on anyone, but it's really interesting how vastly different definitions of agritourism are. There are added definitions between farms and agritourism, such as accessory on-farm business that other states use that account for the retail and the production side of value-added agriculture. So we'll be sure to include some of those findings and just some of those interesting and unique ideas as we kind of finalize this document. Next slide, please. So there's gaps created with differing use of commercial. Like I just alluded to, farms and agriculture has a bunch of definitions, whether it's locally on a table of permissible uses, whether it's under a state issued license, whether it's federal, right? The feds have a lot of definitions. There's even definitions for urban farm for numerous programs that give financial resources, yet locally there's still not a lot of definitions. So somebody could get funding but not necessarily fall within the scope of what that operation is locally from a land use standpoint. But that word commercial definitely can be a scary buzzword. When we say commercial, we think about septic and we think about infrastructure and all these hefty investments. Well, we understand the importance of public health and safety. We also know that sometimes just this word can be intimidating to the businesses when all along these farms are commercial enterprises because they are family businesses trying to increase their profit margins and keep their farm a farm. And engaging with these local jurisdictions, whether it be building permit officials or environmental health specialists, there seemed to be a concern with lacking regulatory formulas for capturing what agriculture and agritourism is becoming. A lot of these formulas specifically for capacity are tied to building occupancy or things that are permitted elsewhere. Well, what happens when the majority of these activities are happening outside? There's no tie to the number of picnic tables or the parking spaces. And so you often see a disconnect between, capacity for the adequate public facilities and the small itty bitty building that's actually making the product and selling it, even though everyone's going outside to enjoy it. An overextension in regulation across the levels. This just means the way the information being requested or that a regulatory level is trying to establish working with a business. So we just had an offline conversation in that regard of if there's a state license specific to farms, how are we defining that farm and how are we showing evidence that that farm is agricultural when that is land use? So what type of mechanism could we work on or establish as far as working with local jurisdictions so they understand what would be required to meet these standards at the state level? So we can direct the business locally, knowing they're going to go to the state, but then that process is going to stay at the state rather than the back and forth that sometimes happens. So if you haven't taken away from this yet, there's still a lot of programming and initiatives that are going to be byproducts of this plan and guidance document, just because we're realizing that there's still some communication and procedural things that we can certainly work on MDA and collaboratively to help guide these businesses through some of these processes. And so lastly, I'll just jump into just next steps so you know what to expect from us. So It's weird that we're already feels like we're almost through May, but we're going to continue the local engagement. We have 4 more county visits. And from what I see, Dr. Mitchell, I think at least 3 of the 4 have the environmental health officers in the conversation, at least on the email thread. And we continue to invite them to the conversation, and we'll certainly engage with MDH as we're ready to turn this to outline to a rough draft and start formulating it. We did one project update for agricultural and economic development specialists a month ago. We would like to do a second one this month. Of course, this month is moving quick, but maybe in the next couple of weeks, you'll see an invitation from us. We just did a 1-hour run through, very similar to the presentation you're getting today, on what we're learning, where these trends are, just to, get feedback of the group think and see, if anything's standing out for potential opportunity, major challenges we're missing, are we not really connecting the dots effectively? So far, the feedback's been very, very good and collaborative. June through August is when we're going to really start. We're putting pen to paper now. We hope to have a draft by August so we can start potentially even seeking peer review from organizational representatives or partners. And then with a September publication, so we have time to A, meet any of these legislative cycles, but B, meet the deadline for proposing opportunities to present at these numerous winter conferences or to these industry organizations such as Farm Bureau Conference, MACO, etc. I think that was a lot of information in a brief amount of time. Like I said, we'll make these slides available, and we are trying to be fully transparent in this process. So whether it be an Ag Commission meeting, local Farm Bureau boards have asked to get this information. We're going to start circling back with some jurisdictions that, maybe a regulatory partner was not available. So we're going back that way. We've double dipped a few times in jurisdictions already, really keeping the conversation going. But it's been really collaborative. And like I said, we aren't having this conversation to address a particular issue, so we can be a bit more creative and open in our dialogue of what the challenge is across the industry as a whole. And they've been really, really great conversations. Any questions, concerns, feedback? Stare at you, Dr. Mitchell.
And yes. No, let me just ask Deputy Secretary Kalyana Raman if he has any additional thoughts before, if he's still on. Because I know he had to drop. So do you see him in the participant list? Or did he drop?
I think he dropped already.
Okay. So I will say we've been actively talking about this a lot at the department, and you'll hear some of the updates in a little bit. But I think one of the things that we have been looking at closely is this issue of sequencing and communications. And so as an example, the question you raised a little earlier before we all started with respect to how does, and here I will turn to Samantha Bolton. Dr. Bolton is our new head of facility and process plan review. You will get to know her very well. She has a doctorate in food science, and as a result of that, really knows this area very well. But we've been talking a lot about this issue of how we improve communications locally between the local jurisdiction, the business owner, the facility process plan review. And I think part of the challenge for us, which we've been thinking about a lot, is the issue that for us, it's very difficult to start until we have an application. There's a lot of sort of pre-communication that happens oftentimes between the business owner and a bunch of people locally, including to understand, how are they seen locally. But oftentimes for us, when we start in the Office of Process and Plan Review starts the discussion, there are some initial questions that happen. But one of the things that we sort of have to do is react to a written plan, because that is where the details end up being. And so this issue of sort of sequencing when you ask for the local jurisdiction, what is this property from your point of view? Is it actually considered an agricultural point of view? Is it zoned for retail? Is it zoned residential? How do we do this? This has come up numerous times. And I think this is where we need to think about and communicate with both the businesses and the business development people to get that application in as soon as possible, even if it is sort of preliminary, so that we can start that discussion in paper. And I think part of the challenge for us is that sometimes what happens is we get this recurring loop where there's a lot of communication, including phone calls and emails about, is this residential? Is this not residential? Can you give us an opinion about how you're going to process this? And we don't know the answer to that until we actually see what the local definition is. And so that sort of becomes a loop that the business gets caught in. So we need to think a little bit collectively about how to trigger that application early and recognize that it may not be 100% finished, maybe, but we still need to think about how to be able to get both our facility and process plan reviewers and the local jurisdiction to be working on it concurrently in a way where we can both be advancing. So I don't know if, Sam, you want to say anything more about that, or?
No, I mean, I can just add that, yeah, I think that, having some of that happen behind the scenes, right, with our team communicating with the local health departments and, other local, land use agencies across counties, we interact with them on a regular basis anyway. So it might take some of the, confusion off of business owners. So yeah, I 100% agree with Cliff that, getting the plans in early is the best strategy for, alleviating some of that confusion and stress.
And I will say that, we saw this again recently with another example that you are very familiar with in Montgomery County, where we had farm that was sort of residential, not exactly residential, was in an historic area, so that it actually, we had a bunch of overlay that isn't even typical for these questions, but that involves a designation of an area as historically to be preserved, which means there's yet another layer on that, which is how do you get structures that either do or don't meet current requirements for retail or processing? How do you bring those up to code if you've got not only the local zoning requirements, but also now you have a new overlay, which is the historic preservation requirements. So and I think we similarly found ourselves in a situation where what we needed to do was get the application in and being processed. And it took a long time to get to that point. So I think that the owner, once that happened, we were able to work through it pretty quickly, but there was a lot of pre-conversation that we need to figure out a way collectively to make more efficient.
And I think, and the reason why this analysis document is going to be important is because there's hangups at the local level because of the concept of it being processing, which local zoning language often leans manufacturing or commercial zone and isn't spelled out in agriculture. So we're looking for a farm that can process when, I think in the industry, it's sort of expected that that's part of the agricultural process is taking something and turning it into something else. But we run into that challenge. We're looking for evidence of something is agricultural and can be grown, or can it be manufactured? Well, that's going to be conflicting. So that's a lot of information we're trying to convey locally. Using the zoning matrix that was alluded to earlier, and Megan's on here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the zoning matrix that ALEI published a few years ago, and I believe might plan to revamp with any recent updates at the local level, again, kind of takes a bunch of definitions related to agricultural and land use as it relates to what's happening on farms and show side-by-side comparison, county to county of, who defines agriculture, who defines farm, who defines value added. Aiden was working with me to sort of put a little bit of an analytical twist on this to show the numbers of how many jurisdictions are defining these things. The highest number is 20 out of 24 jurisdictions, and that's the word agriculture. The next best thing is only 14 counties define farm, right? 8 define value added. even less than that, put the word processing in their farm and agricultural definitions. So if it's not captured in what an agricultural land use is, then it falls into, we say retail. Retail is a real scary word too, because we hope to think that part of the agricultural process is being able to sell your products. But again, older land use language when farms were field cropping and taking it to a grain elevator or wherever they needed to sell it, are now trying to grow something, make something, and sell something all on that same parcel. And there's a few layers that aren't captured. So I do appreciate the willingness to have those conversations. And I think as far as working with the process, because we can only guide businesses through law as it exists, is to get things going and processes started so we can have those conversations. But when there really isn't even a universal term referenced at the local level for what these farm and agricultural enterprises are, it's difficult when you're talking about a kind of umbrella state license that requires something at the local level. And so I think that has just become a bit more apparent as this role's been established and we've engaged with the industry. Any other perspectives as it relates to that, or we can move on to some updates? All right, we'll move on to committee discussion. Dr. Mitchell, back to you if you don't mind. There's two topics of discussion. The results of House Bill 559 and any regulatory proposals that might need to come from that, as well as the on-farm home processing license proposed regulations.
Yep, and so thanks very much, Martin. So first, with respect to House Bill 559, I'm happy to report we've actually already drafted regulatory text. That text it largely mirrors the language in the bill. This is not this one fortunately is not complicated. So it'll live within our food service regulations in COMAR 101503. Patricia Valls already has drafted language. It's being reviewed in our Office of Support and Services by Chris McGrath, who's on the line. I anticipate this will have a rapid turnaround because it is relatively straightforward. I do want to mention one thing because I don't want it to be a surprise to people. When we think about food service, we certainly think about bathrooms and access to bathrooms for both patrons and staff. We also think about water with respect to food preparation and cooking. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that we haven't changed requirements in statute or in regulation for regulations related to water for food preparation and cooking. Those still exist for obvious public health reasons. And so the regulations do speak specifically to, as they do in the statute, to laboratory services and laboratories for patrons in agritourism, in businesses that operate as agritourism. They will not change the requirements for water or water under pressure with respect to food preparation and cooking. So that I think we will strive to make that clear in our communications with the business community, because I think when these go out for public comment, I think I want to be sure, and we want to be sure that it's clearly understood what these do and what they don't do. So that is a question that comes up not infrequently if there's food preparation or food handling going on in an agritourism business. This will answer the question about laboratories, but local health departments, and we will still be looking at the water under pressure questions and any issues related to either septic or sewer hookup that are required by environmental law and by state statute and regulation.
Quick question on that, Cliff.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, we understand that regulations are not being removed for water under pressure, but I always think of Old Westminster in that particular case. So are you saying MDH will continue to be like flexible when you look at what, if the requirement is water under pressure, but someone has a hand washing station that's temporary maybe not pressurized, is the requirement, sorry, is the requirement strictly for pressurized water, or is it just that you must have water available on site for hand washing for food processing?
So this is where and I agree with you, Rachel, this is where the details become important. So with that example and others, we always have an issue with, if you've got cooking going on, an actual food preparation, then you'll need running water. That won't, you can't have temporary water available for that. The question about a temporary hand washing station is one that we have run into a couple of times. And, ultimately what we want is to make sure that people can wash their hands with running water when they are close to food, because hand sanitization, this is a question that comes up frequently, hand sanitization may temporarily sanitize, but it doesn't actually clean effectively. And that is one of the things that we run into a lot. So washing your hands, and I'll ask Patricia to comment on this in a minute. We realize there are situations where you may not have access to running water immediately. Our goal is to get running water, because ultimately that is safest for food handling, is to have a sink nearby where people can wash their hands and the produce or whatever it is that they are doing. So that's always our goal, ultimately, with a fully functioning licensed food service facility. The interim period is, I think, the question that always comes up, and how we manage that. But we in MDE, and here I will not speak for MDE, but we talk a lot together about both what the requirements are and how to manage those in the context of a food service facility. And I suspect that will be one of it's not going to be a thorny issue for these regulations. It will be one of the things that we will be looking at a lot as we think about what some of the other dimensions of food service in the agritourism space are. But
yes, we want to make sure we want to keep these two issues separate, because they start going crazy with it. Because what we're talking about right now with the chemical toilets, that's specific with the legislation, the way it was written. And that's how it's written in the regulation. So it does have to require water, and that was in legislation. So water, it has to have soap, paper towels, and all that. So it has to have that. So, but what Dr. Mitchell was saying, we want to make sure that still, if it's a food service facility, they still have to have water. Now, there's different ways to get that. And depending on what type of food service it is this a temporary facility? Is this some kind of special food service facility? There's different regulations that would apply to those. So we would have to look at the situation. That's why we always ask for the application, so we can see what exactly is happening on this. Because with certain special food service facilities, you might not need water at pressure. But it just depends on what the situation is.
And I will, sorry. No? Okay. And then one other aspect of that, which is not related to these regulations, but we have talked about and are continuing to look at this issue of our definitions of temporary and seasonal, and thinking about what that means in the context of agritourism operations. That, I think we all agree, is sort of the crux of where a lot of these issues end up being, is that the agritourism industries don't necessarily fit into either of those, and we need to think about how to create a space for them where it is clear, depending upon, exactly as Pat said, depending upon how often they operate, whether they are growing, how many people they are serving, is it fixed and permanent? Is it not fixed? Is it what is it exactly? And I think that's where we're having an internal conversation, which I think will also spill into our conversations at the full committee with respect to how we sort of think about this moving forward. Because I'm the first to admit, we recognize that a lot of challenges have to do with the fact that in statute, a temporary license and a seasonal license. Neither one of them has been perfect for a lot of the businesses that we're talking about.
And that's also a concept that trickles down locally where there's challenges, right?
Yep.
There are special event permits and then
Yep.
there's nothing in between. And we've even had some really interesting proposals, again, just proposals, thinking out loud, when engaging with jurisdictions of the idea of like seasonal zoning and permissions, as in simplifying, right? Not a full-fledged site plan, but a sketch plan from, as in, hand-drawn Google map, like this is, we'll bring these cars to this field from April to October, and this is where we will pull a temporary food service license to sell our strawberry shortcake, and this is the berry barn where people will, pay for their berries, and getting that approved. So there is formal review, like there's a parking area, and therefore there has to be some consideration, but I'm getting that approved. So they're out of compliance when they're operating 7 months out of it, right? But they're getting approval, and the thought that locally maybe that could help, with some of these temporary short-term solutions that come with that help businesses scale up, right? Help you start turning a profit and earning revenue as you expand. Maybe you do eventually want to be year-round, and then that's where considerations and investment come into play. We know that the craft beverage operations sort of test that theory a little bit, and that's how the food service stuff has come up. I will say thank you for the clarity. I figured as much, but I know that our phone was ringing as soon as HB 559 started getting legs and moving through, because even in dry season, there's newly established properties that are trying to be a tasting room that aren't getting the opportunity to do a perk test because of how dry it's been. And so now they're wondering, does this legislation suddenly allow me to just start operating without any kind of waste disposal system? And we knew that the food side of that was going to pose some challenges. So we certainly will need clarity as that process goes through to make sure we're conveying the appropriate information. But we appreciate the hasty movement on that and all that clarification.
So the other item is the on-farm home processing. So fortunately, while you're not allowed to have regulations open for two different things at the same time, or two sets of same regulation open twice, this new set of regulations we are also working on. We also anticipate a rapid turnaround on these. These are in our regulations for processing under Comar 101504. And they are draft regulations which, in response to Senator Gallion's bill, would lift the cap from 40,000 to 50,000 for on-farm home processing sales, and exempt meat and cheese that are processed off-site altogether from those caps. So those regulations actually, thanks to Patricia Walls, include another provision which is just to clarify two things that keep coming up in different jurisdictions. One is to make sure that this refers to events, festivals, sort of universe of things that that would allow for mobile units to be used. And it also clarifies that mobile unit, and I know this statute because I worked on it originally, that mobile units are reciprocally recognized in different jurisdictions. So if you're licensed as a mobile unit, you may be inspected in another unit, in another jurisdiction, but the license is recognized. So you don't have to be duly licensed in two different jurisdictions. And this question comes up occasionally because we didn't explicitly put it in regs probably clearly enough the first time round for the local jurisdictions, but we are now clarifying that. So those two minor tweaks to our regulations, along with the lifting of the caps, should help the on-farm home processors, particularly those who sell in farmers markets in other jurisdictions, because it should make it easier for them to go there and at a variety of events and festivals, take their mobile units and sell their produce. So again, those are already in draft and being reviewed internally by the department. So I anticipate a quick turnaround, and thanks to Patricia and the folks in the Office of Food Protection and Chris McGrath and the folks in our Office of Support services. Those are moving fairly quickly. So that's where we are.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Any questions online on any of those updates?
I just wanted to follow up on one specific aspect of the on-farm home processing license, and that is the renter, the farmer renter component of that license. I believe during the main GICA meeting, it was mentioned that that was being investigated. Is that still on?
Thanks. That is being discussed with our Office of the Attorney General. And the issue is to clarify the relationship between a renter, a leaser, a lessee, somebody who lives on the property, and our Attorney General is looking at that. I don't think we've had a final decision yet on that. This iteration will not affect that because we don't have a final answer. And some of the issue has to do with under what circumstances, in terms of your relationship to the property, can you guarantee access to the property at any time for purposes of compliance? So as a license holder, we anticipate that the license holder, as part of that license, will have the ability to permit access to the grounds at any point for purposes of enforcing food safety requirements or evaluating them or investigating them. So part of the challenge is making sure that it's really clear how that would take place depending upon exactly what the relationship is of the person applying for the license to the property and the ability to access the property. So we are talking about it a lot, but it is still under discussion. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Thank you for the update on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo thank you for the update on that as well. And it's a very interesting question given that, from my understanding, you know, when there's someone who, a lessee, within the terms of that, the lease agreement, they take on those rights to permit others onto the property, even to the extent where if they wanted, you know, if the landowner were to agree to it, they would need permission, you know, or give a certain amount of notice for themselves as a landowner to access the property while the lessee is in possession of a property. So
yeah,
very interested.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. That is part of the nuance that we are trying to understand with the Office of the Attorney General.
Thank you. Yep. Those are the two items that we had for committee discussion. So we will move into new business and then open it up to members for any updates, insight, questions. The new business, as you see A and B, first is committee deliberation on departmental legislation proposals. And this is really just a notice to the committee, being conscious of our timelines as it relates to regulatory and legislative cycles. We would need to know in July if we or any members of the subcommittee feel that there are any initiatives or priorities discussed in these committees that might warrant departmental legislation to move forward. And then that the July meeting, which is, when is that? That will be July 17th for the subcommittee, with the next full GICA meeting, August 7th. That the July meeting will be used to finalize those discussions as a group before bringing it before the full commission in August. I don't think I'll see if there's anything on the floor that would want to be discussed in that regard now, but I think this is sort of an invitation to think on it, bring it to us July, and we'll try to keep an open agenda to have some constructive conversations if there's anything. But of course, there's a great deal of regulatory proposals and actions going on right now that we look forward to getting the updates on.
Right, if I may.
Sure.
And that's just because I know all of our agency partners know this. Our public members may not be aware, but as agencies, if we're going to submit bills to be considered by the governor's office to be departmental legislation sponsored by any of our agencies, in the next year's legislative session, those proposals are due to the governor's office by September 1st every year. And so that's the reason why we would want to discuss those and firm up any potential proposals within the next subcommittee meeting, present them to the full GICA in August. That way, we have the remaining weeks of August to get those proposals ready to go by September 1st.
Thank you, Rachel. And then moving from that, the second item is simply a future invitation for departmental priorities. So we have given a presentation briefly on what MDA is working on in this space, value-added agriculture and agritourism, as it relates to the statewide guidance document and analysis, some of the collaborative initiatives that have been ongoing. But if there's anything within this space that we have not been covering in agendas and might be timely or worth us introducing, either new business or just for discussion, we welcome any input and insight from your expertise and your teams and your perspectives.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is we want to know what your concerns are as it pertains to agriculture at your agencies, the things that are a priority for you, not just the things that we consider a priority. That way, it's clear for every agency that this is a venue for you to present those things here as well, so that we can talk about what your highest concerns are in the ag industry, and how we can help work through solutions in this particular body. Sorry, great thought. But just making sure that, we can talk about all the issues, not just our MDA priorities. And Secretary Hooker, I know that this is a new meeting for you. Like I said, Joe's been present. He's been very engaged, even in his Sunrider subcommittee meetings. And I know Secretary Adams has probably discussed some of these things with you, value-added agritourism, agriculture and agritourism being two of the newer sort of facets of the agricultural industry in the state. And as you can see, there are a lot of places where maybe there are some gaps or some things that, some challenges that we see on a regular basis that we're still trying to figure out how to address, because the law hasn't quite caught up to the industry because it evolves so quickly. And so we want to make sure that we continue to partner with all of our agencies to collaborate on anything that you all see that could be of concern or
Yeah, if I can amplify that a little bit, one thing that you guys may not be thinking of, but I am a lot thinking of these days, is data and information. And one of the things that we as a state can do to help our stakeholders while still meeting our agency missions is share data. I know in the agricultural field, I work in the agriculture, that there is certain data that will not be shared. So let's just compartmentalize. But as we're talking about value add and agritourism, I think there's a new opportunity where if MDA is a trusted source, or the locals can share data, which makes it easier to evaluate in advance, that is a way to get there faster. So thinking about the technology now, not after it's all decided, but immediately, and how data sharing agreements can be put forward so that, a future farmer who wants to set something up fills out one set of forms that addresses multiple needs. Keep it simple, keep it straightforward, share data. Don't conform to the process, but make sure that we are really thinking structurally about how we get this done for our farmers.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's come up in quite a few local visits too. It's just the consistency and consolidating that information so it's streamlined. We talk about, a few of the agencies at the table here, but there are some processes that don't even get tied into a local permitting process. If you're an agritourism operation, this is one of the fun facts we share. I think only 3 jurisdictions were familiar with it, but the state fire marshal office expects to sign off and approve corn mazes. That's one of those processes. If you're a local farm who's simply doing everything outside and getting approved to do that, in some jurisdictions it's by right. So there's no formal way to initiate a conversation with that state fire marshal office. There's an expectation the business knows to make that call and get that inspection. And so how can we better prepare? So I think a lot of this too, right? We're talking top down, but there's a lot of bottom up that we need to work on. So preparing local jurisdictions, getting that information. I know the measurables for value added has been a tough one and one we continue to work on. A lot of the licenses that relate to farms aren't necessarily always farm specific. And there, of course, is census information out there as it relates to agricultures and farms. When we talk about the commerce that's happening on farms and the value added aspect and even the agritourism aspect, they're still a little separated out there. So finding ways that we can consolidate that and share, I think, is definitely something we'll be working
Megan Tow's got her hand raised online.
Yeah, I'm just kind of following up on this, and I can't see, is it that Suzanne who asked the question about consolidating? Hey, Martin, question for you. Was part of the work that Aiden did over the summer taking a look at maybe how other state departments, whether they have a consolidated approach to value-added licensure already? I know, like, at the end of the day, we're concerned with what works best for Maryland, but
we have some examples, but it's a matter of, like, there are state certifications and recognition procedures, but the question then comes is like, what does that validate you for? And there still seems to be a challenge and disconnect as it relates to like the local land use. Because if they're meeting our standards and are compliant at state level, nutrient management, et cetera, like we can say, oh, you're a farm. I'm going to air quote that again because we're talking about lacking definitions in our eyes. But what does that allow you to do depending on your acreage or all of these other types of conditions that may exist either in local land use, whether it be for building permits or zoning certifications? One of the examples that had come up through the process, but relevant to today's discussion, is the concept of like a zoning verification letter, right? And I think that's something we're sort of leaning towards when working with some of these businesses trying to go for a state license, that they need to show that they're a farm or agricultural operation. But a zoning verification letter in practice, and I come to MBA by way of local economic development, and these are sometimes formal applications that take a good amount of time for a formal review, because zoning verification letters are the same thing a prospective developer is getting to make sure that they can secure investment, to make sure they can do what they're proposing to do on that land. And we go back to the word scalability. If a farm just wants to know that they can grow their culinary lavender and then turn it into lavender syrup in the home kitchen, that process could be a $200 process and a several week waiting period, when they just need evidence that, hey, I'm a farm in this zone and you, the government, recognize me as such. So we've been talking about that too, of like, where would that exist for that type of verification? But I think simplifying it is really something we should work towards. And yeah, there are some examples that'll come out in this document.
Okay, and I'm sorry if I didn't pick it up, but were you looking at other states that maybe have done a similar approach?
Yeah, so Vermont is one. They have some state issued licensing. We're not 100% sure on, again, what that encompasses as far as what else they're eligible for, other than being designated, recognized, registered, and counted. And I think that's what we're trying to see is at what level would you be recognized to then be able to leverage or streamline other processes.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm just going to put it out there, since I know Aiden, you mentioned this is his last week, but if there's a desire to have a little bit more research done on that particular question, as perhaps to draw examples, I can have some interns do some work on that, and up until like July, the middle of July.
Well, I will take you up on that, Megan. Already, yes. But we'll loop you in on where we are on some of those materials and stuff, right? And yeah, no, any assistance would be very helpful, because I think every single time, every new county we visit, the laundry list of things to include in this report get longer. It is going to be lengthy, but the whole purpose is to get that entire web laid out there so we have it in one place, and then we can collaboratively sift through it, understand where some of the pressure points are, and continue to make some collaborative decisions on how to address some of these challenges.
Well, I think circling back is, as Megan's talking about, that statewide permit or sort of blanket that helps serve as that guiding light. You mentioned earlier in your presentation about the definition of agriculture, and agritourism currently has a definition, but there are a lot of these other key factors that that frankly don't. It was the number 20 out of 24 define agriculture in their own various ways. And that was sort of the probing thought as in the last full GICA meeting, asking each agency, how do you define agriculture? Because even internally, it varies. Whatever specifically is set forward in COMAR, set forward on what you're looking at in the concept of agriculture. And we noted it then, but I'll repeat it now. We don't even have our own definition of agriculture because for a lot of historical reasons, but we don't want to put barriers on it. We don't want to limit it. We don't want to tell what is and what isn't on the basis of, we want to let farmers and agricultural professionals have the reins to make decisions as they go forward and not be constrained by what we define it as. But I think that is over time proven to be not effective as the State Department of Agriculture, where we need to be really setting forward that guiding light to help shape and define these things as counties are looking to see what's going to be the best fit. And they often look to us to say, well, how does MDA define X, Y, or Z? Or where would that fit within MDA's list of definitions? And frankly, it doesn't exist. So it's hard for them to be making these individual recommendations on a county by county basis to say this is what it is and what it isn't. Well, why does that matter if I go 5 miles down the road and go to a different county where here it is, there it is. So it's an exciting endeavor, and Megan, not to put it out too quickly, but as the Ag Commission is looking at this term of regenerative agriculture and how we're going to define that moving forward for some other both state priorities, but also helping the industry guide toward what that's going to look like. We're very excited to work with Megan, the ALEI team, and their interns over the summer at really putting together a comprehensive package of what agriculture is defined as internally in the state, both in jurisdictions, but also within the different departments in the executive side, but also how other states are doing it. See if there's a way that we can move forward, whether it's this body, the Ag Commission, or some combination of both. Yes.
So this is a question for the three of you.
Sure.
So it feels as though there's both agriculture, the verb, and agriculture, the noun, particularly with respect to land that is agricultural property or agricultural land. And then agriculture that is the verb, which is the act of doing. And this, again, we got to the apiaries and sort of thinking about a residential property in which somebody has a backyard garden. And that includes a beehive. And is there a difference between that as agriculture from a zoning point of view, agriculture as a verb, as to what that person is doing? And the reason I'm asking this question is because it has significant connotations for whether or not locally that would qualify if that person decided to open a campground on their property and it was considered agritourism, where you're not necessarily preserving agricultural land in that case. You are, however, asking us to consider that for purposes of whether or not it would qualify as agritourism, even though it is not on agricultural land.
Yeah, I'll take the first part of this apple. So that's a really great question. And I'd say it is both. That's an accurate assessment. There is the noun and then there is the verb. We've had this discussion with SDAT for several years now, right? Where if a property is zoned agriculturally, but there's no active agricultural activity happening there, and then someone purchases it, there's a home, but they say, I've bought 5 alpacas, and now I want to bring the public on to pet these alpacas, and I also want to have ATV riding and a campground, and I want to call this agritourism. There's no active agriculture happening there. For our intents and purposes here at MDA, there has to actually be the primary function of that property has to be agricultural production or activity. And so I think we're on the same page there. We see it as the same, and that's something that we look at when it comes to various questions that we get from folks who are trying to start an agritourism business or expand their traditional farm operation. that's something that we look at heavily here. So we're on the same page there. And we understand that that's a challenge and it's something that we try to navigate on a regular basis because as the industry ever evolves, and again, as other people are looking for lucrative forms of business, some people just think I can buy land and, you know, have all these activities here and it's agritourism. And I think we're pretty clear here that that's not standard agritourism. That's just you taking available open space and providing recreational opportunities for people to come onto your property for recreation. But we wouldn't consider that agritourism. Now, if you are producing a product there and processing it, we would consider that value-added agriculture. But we wouldn't, you know, you have to be actually growing something there and then processing it or sending it away for processing, like the meat or cheese, sending it away for processing, right, or fiber, sending it away for processing, and then saying I'm going to sell it here. But it cannot just be that you've got a little petting zoo and you want people to come and look at your animals and charge them for that. That we wouldn't consider that agritourism.
Yeah, and I think that's very helpful to us to have that really clearly spelled out, because that is the question that we get not infrequently from local health departments because of the way though that is translated locally.
Well, and we heard that not just from environmental health, but zoning and planning as well. I mean, we define, again, we don't define it through law, but through programs and a regulatory oversight, we recognize what a farm is, and we recognize a farm pretty minimally from the land use standpoint. It's the business side when it becomes relevant, right? 8,000 pounds of live animal weight or $2,500 in revenue. That's not hard to do if your side hustle is going to be the event venues or something, right? That is week in, week out. So we understand the concerns locally about that. And so that's why the examples we have seen, again, only if there's 20 agriculture definitions across jurisdictions, and don't quote me on this, it was like 12 or 14 for farm. Some of that was distinguishing the practice and the land use, is that agriculture is the idea of growing things, contributing to the food supply chain. But farm is agriculture on this many acres or more. And so they found a way to set a standard. The challenge is agritourism is such a wide definition that includes simple concepts of buying strawberries at the berry barn or going to a winery any Saturday you want and overlooking the vineyard. And so the local jurisdictions are struggling with that. And there is a conceptual definition that has a lot of things, but doesn't tell what the agritourism definition does not explain to local jurisdictions how to regulate that. There's already been some just good dialogue about creative solutions. We've talked about potential footprints as far as zoning approvals, right? If you're going to be designated agritourism in this part of the property, then there's an expectation that this ratio is in production. So if 1 acre is for agritourism, and that includes the tasting room and the parking, and we know 1 acre is not nearly enough, right? So 3 acres are designated to the driveway, the parking, the picnic tables, and the tasting room, then there's a 1 to 4 expectation that 4 times that is in production under some kind of, nutrient management conservation plan too. So no one has implemented it. No one has practiced it.
You intend to define that, because the whole property could still be agritourism, farm tours, right?
Well, so again, the way it was getting floated out, no, because agritourism is defined as something that can happen on an agricultural property. Locally, some are. Again, I think there's only 12 jurisdictions that define agritourism, and many point at the state. But the point being, there's some jurisdictions that recognize even in concepts, or talk about concept versus land use, agritourism is different things. I come from a jurisdiction that you pick produce under their agricultural operation definition, so that farm can do it by right. Now, the wineries and breweries and things, and the camping, and in this jurisdiction, hunting and bird watching and everything else under the sun, that will really test the envelope when someone comes and tries to validate that, is agritourism. And so there could be ways, but again, it would be a matter of best practice for a jurisdiction to adopt, and it would have to be interpreted 24 ways. But for these local jurisdictions that are looking for creative solutions that aren't just putting a 30-acre minimum on where agritourism could take place, those are some of the conversations that are being had.
Martin, have you looked at SStat to see what their definition is?
Yes.
we've had extensive conversations with them about that. And in recent years, there have been several versions of legislation. There wasn't this year because we thought we could handle that via regulation or revising the regulations in the text article for what the definition of agriculture is, as that has expanded through the years. And the definition is pretty much still only relevant to traditional agriculture. And so that's been an issue. And one of the things we discussed with SDAT was it would be easy if SDAT could just look at whether or not that property has an agricultural use assessment, or ask us, do they have a nutrient management plan? That's the easiest way for us to know if they're a farm. Do they have a nutrient management plan? Then in our opinion, they're automatically a farm or agriculture operation. They're adhering to our nutrient management guidelines. Simple. Very easy. Very easy to say this is a farm. Now, to Cliff's point about someone who has an apiary, we also don't want to discourage, urban agriculture and small new beginning farmers, folks who may not have a lot of land, but are trying to maximize that. And like Martin said, we have programs here for small and urban farms. And we're recognizing more and more that land access is an issue. So there are people who are just not going to be able to purchase 5 acres or even 100. And so they're using whatever land they have available to get started with some sort of agricultural project. But most of those folks are starting, they're growing row crops, or seasonal crops, but they're not necessarily looking to do agritourism. So it's pretty clear to say this is still a farm. It's just an urban farm operating off of minimal acreage, but there's even a definition for what that is in state statute for urban agriculture, and specifies who could be eligible for those programs or an urban agriculture tax credit based on the size of the property. And so it's kind of still, we feel like it's easy to tell. And from our perspective, it'd be easy for us to say, yes, this is a farm. No, this isn't. Yes, there's agricultural activity happening here. No, there isn't. Yes, this is agritourism. No, there isn't.
So you guys should do that.
Yeah.
And then we'll listen.
Yeah. And it's case by case. It really is. It's case by case because every operation is different. And so, Martin and Aiden just did tours, but we've senior staff here. We do farm tours year round with Secretary Addicks, and we've traveled the state, and no one farm operation is the same. Not a single one. No one grain operation is the same as the other. No one cattle operation. No one winery. They're all set up different. Each one is like its own small town, being managed and operated in a different way. And so we know it when we see it. But if we pull up somewhere and someone invites us and says, come to our farm, and we get there and we see the operation, we might say this is a great small business model, but not necessarily agritourism or agriculture. And so we know it when we see it.
But I appreciate your comment of that is our jurisdiction, right? That's our responsibility, and we're going to lean very heavily on specifically the Maryland Ag Commission, which is comprised of farmers as the advisory body to the secretary, but also our experience and knowledge here. So I appreciate the sentiment, but yeah, it's a tricky thing, but it needs to be done.
Right, and you don't need us to, right?
No, we don't. We would love to have you at the table for the conversation.
We are happy.
But we would love to set the course. We would love to set the course.
We are glad for you to just ask us, hey, is this property an agriculture operation? Is this agritourism? Right? And we gladly simply say, based on our assessments, based on XYZ criteria, yes or
Well,
no.
and that's the legislative change that should we need to go back and, we have, as we said, agricultural definitions in our statute, but boy, would I like to be able to say whatever NDA says.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Yep.
so we're really interested in from land use, but I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that. I don't think our secretary will have a problem with that, so let's go.
Meeting is being recorded, right?
It is, and it's the land use and concept struggle, and that just goes beyond agriculture too. I mean, you talk about just the idea of commercial, right? There are commercial zones, but farms are commercial businesses, and so, but they're in agricultural zones, and so sometimes what that farm intends to do does not align with the local jurisdiction's definition of what that farm should be doing, or an oversight. I mean, we've even run into this into the word processing and some of these seafood processing, blue catfish, not to go on that whole tangent, there's not enough time, but the seafood processing in commercial and, heavy industrial zones, when now there's these marinas that are bringing in the waterman's catch, and the processing is happening right there along the water, or a very consolidated area in a rural village or community. So, it's complicated. We appreciate everyone going on this ride with us, because the more we peel back the layers on this onion, the smellier it gets. But we are going to provide this document, and hopefully it's going to guide some continued conversation.
Process facial fears.
Huh?
Don't process facial fears.
Oh, years. Rural, residential village, rural, commercial process.
We're not.
We'll take that.
I have a few, one extra step right here.
Just Gateway Legacy Act, we'll talk about that.
Oh, yeah,
offline.
no, that is something we follow closely.
Okay.
Yes, we're aware of that.
So it's not processing, but it's.
It's, yes, but I think the spike through the head is not processed.
No.
So there is an old business section, but I'm not sure. I think that what all the updates really covered what we have been talking about. This has been crazy to believe only the second subcommittee meeting, but look at us go. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in person and online. I will ask if there's any final comments for the good of the order. Thank you. I'll ask if there's any public comment, but I'm not sure we're joined by any members of the public online.
I'm a member of the public, but I don't have any comments.
You're appointed public, Megan. You are no
Oh,
longer.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Well, if that's the case, I will request a motion to adjourn the meeting. Jessica made the motion to adjourn. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second from Joe.
We need an appointed
We need an
member.
appointed member, Joe.
But Megan, since you just had your mic on.
Second.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. So
Motion hadn't passed.
we just be sitting here.
Thanks, all. We appreciate your work.
Right, yeah.